Good evening. I invite you to find your seat. Welcome to Family Weekend at Palm Beach Atlantic University. For those family members, parents, grandparents, other loved ones who have come to this presentation by the LeMieux Center for Public Policy, one of the university's 5 centers of excellence, we welcome you. This is a special weekend, and the LeMieux Center Fellows Program is always our initial event for Family Weekend. Welcome. I hope you will stay and enjoy the festivities that have been planned for the entire university community and family. This is a very special evening for 2 LeMieux Fellows, and we are honored by their faithfulness, their commitment to academic excellence, their faith, and the many, many ways that they have demonstrated servant leadership during their Palm Beach Atlantic University career. I'm going to begin my remarks by simply stating that Florida was made by visionaries who saw into the future and dreamed boldly. If you have not had an opportunity to purchase a copy of Florida Made, written by Senator George LeMieux and Palm Beach Atlantic University alumnus Laura Mize, I encourage you to do so, and I hope that there are copies here this evening so that you might purchase those tonight. If you want to order, members of the university staff will be pleased to get your name, mailing information, and send you a copy of Florida Made. 25 very important figures who shaped this state, the Sunshine State. I encourage each of you to secure a copy of this, and I would share with our 2 fellows that if you have not already received a copy of Florida Made, I bet tonight might be an opportunity when you can get an autographed copy from Senator LeMieux. Florida Made, congratulations, Senator, on a book well written and well received throughout this state and throughout this nation. It certainly talks about the vibrancy of Florida and the visionaries who made this state what it is. The quality of life that we now enjoy is a direct result of these 25 individuals who have shaped and changed the course of history in the state of Florida. Congratulations. This evening is the 5th opportunity we have had to hear from LeMieux Fellows, and I am absolutely delighted that you have joined us. We have a prestigious number of students in the past, 8 students in the past, who have been selected as LeMieux Fellows and who have presented on this same Family Weekend evening. We're delighted that you are here. We're thankful to Senator George LeMieux for his contribution of his Senate papers to the university, which are now in the university's archives on the 3rd floor of the Warren Library. We're also thankful to faculty members who have worked alongside of Senator LeMieux for mentoring previous fellows. We're especially thankful tonight to have Dr. Jennifer Elmore of the Department of English and Dr. Linda Rader of the Department of Politics, who have been so instrumental in this year's LeMieux Fellows. Congratulations to each of you for being faculty members selected, and we thank you for your mentorship over this past year of these 2 LeMieux Fellows. Allow me to introduce Senator George LeMieux, who will make some additional comments and remarks. Would you please join me in extending a warm Palm Beach Atlantic University welcome to our good friend, George LeMieux.
Well, good evening, everyone. Good evening. One more time. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. It's my privilege to be with you again tonight. President Fleming and I were recounting the fact that this is our 5th presentation of the LeMieux Fellows. I see some LeMieux Fellows alumni here. Welcome. It's a really fantastic endeavor that the university has allowed me to be a part of, which is to work with students and a faculty advisor where we get together in the spring semester every other week to work on a significant paper and topic of research and study. So President Fleming likes to say that the faculty to student ratio is 2 to 1, but not 2 to 1 the way you would think. There's only 1 student for 2 folks who are helping on the faculty side, myself as a volunteer. And it is an extraordinary process because we dig into issues that are really important to the state and to this country. And something happens during each and every one of these interactions that I've been a part of over the past 5 years. And that is that the student at some point realizes that the topic they are studying, that there's a larger truth. They think they're studying charter schools, which we will hear about tonight, and they believe that they're studying sanctuary cities, which we will also hear about tonight. But the light bulb will go off at some point during the spring semester, and the fellow has that eureka moment where they realize that there's a larger issue at play, a larger set of values and principles that they've discovered that is the underpinning for the research they're doing. And for me, that's the best moment. And I like to say every year that I get far more out of this than the students do, because I get to be there to witness that aha moment that they have when they reach that larger truth. So that's part of what we're doing in the LeMieux Center for Public Policy. It's an academic focus to make sure that we are giving to these fantastic students another opportunity to advance their academic pursuits, their writing, their research, and we think it's going to help them in the future as they pursue whatever career they like, whether they continue to pursue study in school in a graduate degree or whether they go off into the world. Another neat thing that's come out of this LeMieux Center is that we now have alumni of the LeMieux Center who are off doing great things, and President Fleming and I get a lot of joy from the success of people who have been LeMieux Center Fellows. One of the first LeMieux Center Fellows we had in year 1 is Molly Michaels, and Molly now today sits at the desk next to the door to the Oval Office of the President of the United States, just 5 years removed from Palm Beach Atlantic University. So we've had some tremendous successes, and that's only one of many of our graduates from the LeMieux Center for Public Policy. I want to recognize Dr. Jennifer Elmore, as President Fleming did. She worked with Ariana Fernandez as the faculty mentor, and also Dr. Rader. Dr. Rader and I think this is our 3rd return engagement. She's a fantastic member of the faculty who I really enjoy working with, and she was the faculty advisor for Sarah Murray, so I wanted to recognize both of them. I want to introduce this year's fellows. Ariana Fernandez is an English and secondary education major from Miami. She entered Palm Beach Atlantic University as a Farish Scholar. She works as a discipleship assistant for Baxter Residence Hall and as an excellence coach in the Center for Writing Excellence. She volunteers in the Bridges Language Academy at PBA and has church involvement in the college ministry at Grace Emmanuel Bible Church in Jupiter. She plans to teach abroad upon graduating, and her topic this evening will be schools choice and charter schools in Florida. Our second fellow for last year was Sarah Murray. She's a communications major from Lakeland, Tennessee. She'll be completing an internship at MAV3 Digital with Mariana Mancuso, who does all of our social media for the LeMieux Center for Public Policy. She held a copy editor position at the Adrian Rogers Pastor Training Institute and a community service coordinator at YouthWorks. She's a student in the Supper Honors Program and has served as a resident assistant on campus. She plans to attend graduate school in a program that combines her interest in politics, political philosophy, and public policy. Her topic is sanctuary city policy. So the order of the program tonight is going to be Ariana is going to start first. She's going to make a presentation about her paper on school choice. Then we'll hear from Sarah on sanctuary city policy. And when Ariana's finished, Sarah, you can just come right to the podium. And then we are going to have some questions that I'm going to help facilitate, questions from the panel, and then we'll take your questions as well. So with that, Ariana.
Well, thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. I would first like to express my gratitude to Senator George LeMieux, to Palm Beach Atlantic University, and to my faculty mentor, Dr. Jennifer Elmore, for giving me this opportunity and helping to push me through all of the research that we did and really discover the larger issue in school choice. So just over a month ago, on September 7th, 2018, Florida Supreme Court voted 4-3 to remove Amendment 8 from the November general election ballot. Amendment 8 would have created a statewide entity that would open and create charter schools independently of the local school boards in each district, a measure cited by some as bound to cause conflict between Florida's already established public education system and the incoming charter schools. A Gallup poll in April of 2017 demonstrated that the issue of whether school choice should be incorporated in Florida is one of the few bipartisan concerns in the nation, demonstrating the issue's importance regardless of one's political ideology. Yet even before President Donald Trump appointed Betsy DeVos as the 11th United States Secretary of Education in 2017, the issue of school choice in America had been rising to prominence as one of the most controversial issues in our nation. Central to the school choice debate is whether the benefits of charter schools, which are privately run, tax-funded schools, outweigh their costs. Proponents and opponents alike are quick to make their opinions known, although both sides have the same goal: ensuring an excellent education to all children in the United States. Tonight, I will define school choice and explain the criteria that form charter schools before introducing several claims in support of and opposition to school choice and drawing some conclusions about Florida's public education system and the charter schools in it. We will examine why school choice, and specifically charter schools, do not threaten the public education system of Florida, determine what makes a successful charter school, and draw several implications for Florida's public school system from this information, keeping in mind that everyone, regardless of his or her opinion on charter schools, has the same goal. The institution of public education in the United States can be defined as a system that aims to provide equal access to free and appropriate education in order to produce members of society capable of fulfilling civic duties. This system has a deep-seated prominence in society's deference of duty to the common good. The first education law in the United States was instituted by the Puritans and required that all children of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts receive an education. This responsibility fell primarily on the parents of these children. However, it soon became clear that not every parent was equipped to provide an excellent education to his or her children. In 1647, the Puritans passed the Old Deluder Satan Law, which required towns of 100 homes or more to hire an experienced teacher who would serve the children of that town in a grammar school. It was the belief of the Puritans that all individuals must learn to read in order to study the scriptures. The purpose of establishing schools available to all children was to ensure that every student had the skills he or she needed to avoid sinning. Over 100 years later, Founding Father John Adams wrote a provision securing public education for all students in the Massachusetts Constitution, and the purpose of this provision was to ensure that all citizens of the state would be able to read and understand laws by which they must abide. From this beginning, Americans have since adopted the belief that all children, regardless of where they live or what their socioeconomic status is, deserve a free and equal public education. In more recent years, some have begun to argue that the definition of a free and equal public education must include opportunities for parents to select schooling options which best meet the needs of their children. In the United States, the term school choice refers to the offering of various programs which give parents the ability to select the most appropriate educational options for their children. These come from several different schooling models, including public schools, private schools, charter schools, homeschools, and virtual schools. School choice also includes programs such as the Tax Credit Education Scholarship and school vouchers. More than 1 in 4 Florida public education institutions is either a charter school or a magnet school, and this serves as evidence of the role that Florida holds as a leader in school choice nationwide. A growing number of parents in Florida are combining several of these options in order to best serve the needs of their children. According to John Kirtley, chairman of Step Up for Students, which provides tax credit scholarships to more than 30,000 low-income students in Florida, this is the future of public education in the United States. In 1996, the first 5 Florida charter schools were approved to open, and since then, Florida legislation regarding charter schools has adapted to state needs and become one of the fastest-growing school choice options in Florida. Florida currently has over 646 charter schools. Each charter school may serve at-risk students or offer a specialized curriculum or core academic program for a certain population. Several local examples include Ben Gamla Charter School, which includes instruction in the Hebrew language, Potentials Charter, which offers support for students with physical impairments, and Believers Academy, which serves as students at risk of academic failure. Perhaps the reason that charter schools are so intriguing is due to the nature of their funding. Charter schools are tuition-free, publicly funded schools formed by a private entity or corporation with the agreement of the local school district. According to the Florida statutes, charter schools must function as nonprofit entities except in select cases. To open one, teachers, parents, corporations, or private businesses can apply for a charter agreement from their local school district. Individuals or organizations wishing to open a charter school must complete an extensive application and submit it to the school board, which will approve or deny the application within 60 days. A charter school combines the relative freedom of a private administration team with the accessibility of a public school. To opponents of the charter school movement, charter schools can seem to drain funding from local public schools or are claimed to not be held sufficiently accountable to justify their allocation of public funding. They're also said that they cannot be reliably measured to ensure high academic performance of their students or are able to hire less experienced teachers, limiting the quality of academic education provided to the students. It is also said that charter schools contribute to segregation by attracting students from a specific ethnic background. On the other hand, proponents of charter schooling primarily value the creation of a competitive marketplace that encourages innovation to encourage student achievement and respond to parental demands, harnessing the power of a free market in improving the overall quality of education. This results in a productivity increase per dollar of the school's funds and avoids restricting a student's education options by his or her geographical location, a limitation that can become, in effect, a form of segregation. They hold that charter schools create a competitive environment that holds public schools accountable, generally have focused curricular emphases, and give parents the ability to choose schooling options that are best suited to their children. They have relative freedom from excessive regulations, encouraging innovative administrative and curricular practices to improve the quality of academic achievement. It is understandable that such an innovative schooling model as charter schools would be quickly criticized by those invested in the traditional, long-established public education system. So it's important to examine the facts about charter schools when making qualitative decisions about their value. First, we need to examine the availability of charter school option in Florida because it depends in part upon reasonable proximity to the students that will attend it. Another reason charter schools might not be available to some students is if a rural area is unable to support the operation of a charter school in the first place. Additionally, the location of a charter school may have a bearing on what backgrounds its students come from and whether the school is truly serving as an option to all students, regardless of socioeconomic status. Critics cite this issue as central to their argument that charter schools actually contribute to socioeconomic inequality and segregation. This map depicts the Florida school districts with one or more charter schools. While the data in this map is from the 2010-2011 school year, it does help in picturing the geographic distribution of charter schools in the state. The current number of Florida counties with charter schools in Florida is 20, an increase of 4 from the time that this map was created. Interestingly, although 1/3 of Florida counties did not have operating charter schools in 2011, those counties only accounted for 5% of the state's public enrollment. I was able to contact several Florida charter school liaisons who gave me several reasons why some school districts might not have an operating school. First, the district is often a smaller, more rural district in which the local public school may already be serving the population adequately. Secondly, the traditional public schools in Florida districts without charters generally seem to be performing well, or at least to the standards of their county's residents. And finally, they told me that there are several districts which hold higher standards or more specific requirements for the opening of charter schools than those of their neighbors with respect to the placement of those charter schools. As in the free market economy system, without a demand for the charter school in a certain area, there will be no incentive for a private entity to open or operate one. On account of the limited availability of charter schools in sections of Florida, one of the most common opposing claims is that charter schools cater only to certain ethnicities or socioeconomic backgrounds, especially in relation to primarily white districts. In a nation that is increasingly concerned about race relations, especially in our nation's public education system, this can be a significant factor in an individual or organization's support or opposition to the presence of charter schools. However, statewide data published by the Florida Department of Education actually suggests the opposite of this problem. Out of a total of 282,250 students enrolled in Florida charter schools during the 2016-2017 academic year, 32.1% were white, 20.5% were African American, 41.5% were Hispanic, and 5.8% identified as other ethnicities, as you can see here. Furthermore, according to statistics from the U.S. Department of Education, only 14% of all charter schools are disproportionately black compared to public schools in the surrounding school district. The racial makeup of more than 2/3 of all charter schools approximately resembles the racial makeup of the district in which the charter school is located. Another main concern of those who oppose charter schools is academic performance of their students. They cite the fact that charter schools are generally offered a great deal of legal freedom in selecting curriculum and developing instructional methods. This, along with the fact that they are not required to use state-mandated tests, opponents assume, contributes to inferior academic performance for students who do not have access to high-quality teaching delivered by knowledgeable instructors. Proponents of charter schools respond by holding that if charter schools do not perform well, its students will leave the school, rendering it unable to sustain its own functioning. This self-correcting solution forms a large portion of the argument that charter schools contribute to a free market system of education. More importantly than these warring beliefs, however, is the fact that although charter schools are not required to administer state-mandated standardized tests, they are required to administer a nationally recognized standardized test to their students each year. In addition to this policy, charter schools must report school performance every year, just as their Florida public school counterparts, which does not leave them free of accountability. As reported by the Office of Independent Education and Parental Choice, 42% of Florida charter schools received a school ranking of A, while 23% received a school ranking of B for the 2016-2017 academic year. This can be compared to data on traditional public schools from the same year, stating that only 35% of public schools earned a grade of A, while 23% earned a grade of B. When these numbers are compared, the discrepancy in performance leans in favor of high performance by charter schools as compared to their traditional public school counterparts. Another hotly debated issue surrounding charter schools pertains to their funding. Opponents of charter schools often claim that they drain much-needed funding from the public school system. However, both national and statewide research studies demonstrate that charter schools actually receive less federal funding per pupil and state funding per pupil than traditional public schools do. One national study stated that charter schools are generally funded at 64% of their district counterparts. In fact, on average, Florida charter schools receive approximately $2,107 less per student than traditional public schools receive, as demonstrated by a national study done by the University of Arkansas in 2014. Thus, in opposition to the perception that charter schools drain money from the public school system, they may actually help with efficient distribution of federal and state funds. The idea that charter schools threaten public education in the United States seems to be tied to the idea that some effort is required to enroll a child in a charter school. Critics argue that self-selection serves to remove so-called involved parents from public schools, transferring them to charter schools simply because they have the initiative to put in the extra effort required to enroll their children. However, this logic is not inherently reliable due to the fact that it relies on several assumptions. First, that all parents who are involved in their children's education somehow have an advantage over those who do not, or are members of a higher socioeconomic bracket. And second, that the majority of parents who enroll their children in charter schools have invested more time and energy in the education of their children than other parents. This issue is further compounded with concerns that charter schools have the freedom to select highest performing students of all ethnicities and boost their own school performance in relation to traditional district schools. The practice of attracting the best students, or those whose parents are most involved, has been termed creaming. It is suggested that under this practice, inner city schools will continue to receive an increasing number of low-performing or at-risk students, making it difficult to improve school performance and graduation rates, while charter schools will continue gaining the advantage of having their student bodies comprised of top-performing, high-achieving students. In fact, data from the U.S. Department of Education illustrates that there is little, if any, evidence of creaming of the best students taking place in charter schools. However, as presented in this table, charter schools in Florida may actually be considered more ethnically diverse than their traditional public school counterparts. The fact that the percentages of various ethnicities is similar between these two groups also suggests that there is not an unequal distribution of students between charter and public schools, which would cause the perceived advantage or disadvantage. In addition to this diversity measured via ethnic background, choice allows low-income families to have the opportunities that middle-class families can create for themselves by either moving or paying for private schooling. Unfortunately, this may indicate a greater level of socioeconomic segregation is occurring in our nation's charter schools. A study performed in 2014 demonstrated that socioeconomic segregation is rising in America's public schools when examining nationwide and district-focused data. However, contrary to popular belief, this stratification often means that charter schools have a higher concentration of students from lower socioeconomic statuses than nearby district schools. In fact, because charter schools can choose to cater to specific student needs and backgrounds, there are many examples in the United States of charter schools comprised primarily of students from disadvantaged backgrounds. One example is Success Academies in New York City. Over 30 Success Academy schools serve students of the most disadvantaged backgrounds in their city and the lowest performance in their area, and are able to produce some of the highest test scores in the state. In summary, the majority of findings collected through investigation of facts that correspond with common claims about charter schools indicate that they are a valid choice option that do not inherently threaten America's public education system. One thriving example is that of Miami-Dade County, Florida. In an interview, Kirtley pointed out that Dade County has a large number of charter schools and is considered the most choice-oriented district in the country. Have public schools suffered, he asked? No. Miami-Dade is one of the most successful school districts in the country. In late February and early March of 2018, I emailed a number of charter school district liaisons in Florida. 5 of these coordinators responded, and none of them cited any controversy or resistance from parents, teachers, administrators, or unions surrounding the opening of these schools. 4 stated that there had not been any notable effect of the charter school's presence on the academic and overall performance of other schools in their districts, while Kathy Hall of Defuniak Springs, Florida, described 2 of her charter schools by stating, quote, "Seaside Neighborhood School is the highest performing school in my district. Walton Academy Charter School is the lowest performing school in my district. However, this school serves students who are in danger of dropping out and who have been placed there in lieu of expulsion or are behind in credits," end quote. So while it's true that not all charter schools are successful, and those that aren't are closed very quickly, there are several specific elements that have been shown to contribute to the success of a charter school. The first is flexibility. Flexibility to employ innovative and instructional practices. Due to their relative freedom from the weight of bureaucracy in several key areas, the most successful charter schools serve as optimally tuned incubators for experimentation in techniques to improve instructional quality, student discipline, and administrative practices. The Organization for the Economic Cooperation and Development reports that, quote, "One of the strongest arguments in favor of school choice is that an increasing autonomy, diversity, and competition in an education system creates stronger incentives for innovation. Innovative change cannot happen in hierarchical and bureaucratic power structures that reward only conformity to rules and regulations. School autonomy, teacher professionalization, and school choice for parents do not guarantee innovation, but they can create the conditions for innovation in education," end quote. This innovation is positively correlated with high academic achievement. And in fact, the article, What Makes a Strong Charter School, written by several charter school researchers, notes that, quote, states that permit schools the freedom to innovate and do not prescribe conditions that look and operate like traditional public schools will rank higher than those which limit variety and innovation, end quote. This is not to say that successful charter schools lack rigorous curriculum or are not held accountable for school performance, but that they have freedom to choose the methods that best serve their unique populations. The second most important key for success in a charter school is cooperation between the school and the district school administration in its vicinity. A study by the OECD stressed that working with others inspires innovation and sustains the drive to innovate. Quote, school autonomy will be self-defeating if it is interpreted as functioning in isolation. Instead, autonomy should take the form of freedom and flexibility to work with many different partners, end quote. Schools should not isolate themselves excessively or be given free rein in the name of independent innovation, but rather should collaborate with other established public and charter schools, county school boards, and district administration in order to best serve the community's diverse needs. Some educational providers have implemented this element of a successful charter school well. One example is the KIPP program, or Knowledge is Power program, which began in the Bronx, New York. In an interview conducted in May of 2018, Neely Boyd, regional manager of math for KIPP Nashville, stressed the importance of working relationships between charter school operators and district schools. She noted that collaboration between district and charter schools made it possible for the schools to share resources in order to effectively coordinate professional development programs for teachers in the district at both traditional and public charter schools. Perhaps more importantly than all of the previous qualifications for a successful charter school follows hand in hand with the cooperative environment. Successful charter schools value meaningful professional development for their staff and faculty because they understand that excellent teachers are necessary to empower students for success. In discussing her own experience, Boyd explained that, quote, the professional development that she got as a teacher in a charter school at KIPP was so much better than she had been getting in a public school that she had been working in, end quote. Because the school was free to set its own priorities and allocate its resources for those purposes, it had greater freedom in determining the most effective ways to equip teachers for successful teaching while still having the ability to coordinate with the local school districts. Successful charter schools are further separated from unsuccessful charter schools by their ability to focus on specific goals and serve a certain population of their choice. For example, Believers Academy in West Palm Beach is specifically focused on serving underperforming and at-risk students. Although the graduation rates at this school are not very high, when calculated based on the state's regular formula, which only includes those students who earn a high school diploma in 4 years, Believers Academy has been widely successful in empowering students to gain the vocational skills that they need to secure a job upon graduation from their program. The final condition necessary to create a successful charter school has to do with education policy. Studies indicate that there is a direct correlation between strong laws and successful charter schools. Strong laws are defined as those which allow charter schools to be independent from traditional school boards, encourage innovation without excessive regulation, and provide parents with numerous options to best meet the needs of their children. When compared to these standards, it seems as though Florida is excelling in its treatment of charter schools. In its 2017 report titled National Charter School Laws, Ranking and Scorecard, the Center for Education Reform ranked Florida as the 7th most favorable state for school choice in the nation based on performance and legislation. Now we've come to the third portion of my research, implications for Florida's public education system. According to the Florida Department of Education, the mission of public education in Florida is to increase proficiency of all students within one, quote, seamless, efficient system by providing them with an opportunity to expand their knowledge and skills through learning opportunities and research valued by students, parents, and communities, and to maintain an accountability system that measures student progress, end quote. If the idea that charter school presence creates competition and contributes to a free market style of educational choice is valid, there must be lessons that have been learned in the context of charter school education that can be applied to the traditional public schools in order to create this seamless system. Just as in scientific or medical studies, individuals voluntarily agree to participate in the testing of new treatments for a disease or exploratory activity with the benefit of treatment, parents and students voluntarily apply to be admitted to charter schools in order to participate in a focused education with specific goals. It makes sense to view charter schools as laboratories for educational innovation, especially in light of the way that public schools have already followed the model of charter schools through the magnet school program. The following suggestions come from evidence and best practices that we have already seen tonight. First, allow all schooling options adjust to the needs of their communities. In order to create an environment in which cooperation is possible between traditional district schools and charters, school districts must allow all schooling options to adjust to the needs of their communities. Working to make education systems more demand-sensitive at the local level means promoting choice options and policies that cause the system to be more responsive to ever-changing and evolving needs of a region's population. If schools are not allowed to respond to diverse student populations to distinguish themselves from each other, choice is meaningless. Secondly, Florida must adopt policies that allow qualified, diverse educational providers to participate in school systems. This must be followed by setting reasonable requirements for charter school providers to collaborate with local school boards in the pursuit of common goals. In her interview, Boyd emphasized that having a distinct and thorough method of training teachers and holding them accountable for best teaching practices is central to providing a quality education in both charter and district schools. These methods should focus on qualitative measures such as observation in the classroom and student work evidence, rather than quantitative data from test scores in order to best serve the students. Third, while maintaining a central authority responsible for the education system of a state necessitates the establishment of guidelines for the operation of various schooling options, school boards should avoid becoming over-encompassing enough to restrict innovation and freedom. Flexibility must be preserved under a standard of quality. States and local governments should have the power to assess and respond to the needs of their locales due to the fact that the United States is large and made of many differing populations. Just as every student has differing educational needs, so every county varies in its focuses, priorities, and necessities. It is impractical to assume that creating legislation responsive to this variation would be best accomplished by the federal government. When these conditions are met, high-quality charter schools become established in a position from which they can serve as laboratories for educational innovation. The discoveries and practices developed from their success can then be adapted to the settings of public schools in order to create mutually beneficial practices of cooperative discovery and improvement. After all, both public school administrators and charter school administrators have the same goal: to benefit their students with a high-quality education. As in the example of Amendment 8 that we saw earlier, separating these two entities by creating a separate board responsible for the establishment of charter schools would not encourage this necessary cooperation. However, over time, effective action based on common understanding will yield a more responsive system of public education that preserves the right of parents to select educational options appropriate for their children. This will contribute to a culture of continuous improvement in public educational institutions that cannot be established through traditional district schools alone. I would like to leave you with one thought, as stated by Boyd. Quote, "If the answer isn't having more options for families, then what is it?" End quote.
My turn. All right. I think I know how to use this. Okay, hi, I'm Sarah. So I did my project on sanctuary cities, and I have a lot of information to throw at you, so I'm just going to jump right in. So the concept of sanctuary in itself has religious origins. Though almost every major religion has some concept of sanctuary, the idea is generally attributed to the Old Testament and the Judeo-Christian tradition. So in the Old Testament, the word sanctuary is most often used to denote the dwelling place of God among his people. As we see in Exodus, the place, Lord, you made for your dwelling, the sanctuary, Lord, your hands have established. And in the Hebrew tradition, they also established what were called cities of refuge. And this was where the Hebrew people set aside specific locations within their society where someone who had committed an unintentional crime, usually a murder, could escape the punishment that he would otherwise receive. Select some towns to be your cities of refuge, to which a person who has killed someone accidentally may flee. So just a brief history of how sanctuary has progressed. The idea of sanctuary as protection of guilty individuals from the law survived within the medieval Catholic Church, but soon came into conflict with the governing authorities of the time. Over time, church-mandated sanctuaries declined in popularity, but the concept was reborn within the secular realm. So in the 17th century, the idea of political asylum was established so that sovereign nations could grant protection for individuals within their borders should they so choose. Though the ideas are almost synonymous, sanctuary usually holds a connotation of spirituality, which is used in religious practices, whereas asylum is typically recognized as a political term. The first signs of the practice of sanctuary in the United States of America are seen in the practice of what was known as the Underground Railroad. So individuals and organizations offered safe hiding for runaway slaves because they believed that the practice of slavery was an unjust practice in our nation. What is commonly recognized as the modern sanctuary movement, however, really saw its beginnings during the presidency of Ronald Reagan. So in the early 1980s, civil wars erupted in the Central American nations of El Salvador and Guatemala, which led to a vast number of these people to seek asylum in the United States. Under United States law at the time, foreign nationals could be granted political asylum in the United States on the basis of a well-founded fear of persecution. But only a few of these cases were evaluated to meet this criteria, while the vast majority of asylum seekers at the time were deemed by the US government to be migrants seeking economic improvement as opposed to refugees in fear of their lives. Many Americans at the time saw these government decisions as unjust and decided to take matters into their own hands. So the birthplace of what is commonly known as the contemporary sanctuary movement was Tucson, Arizona. Several churches in the area began assisting in the illegal immigration of Central Americans and offering them physical sanctuary within their church buildings. During the years between 1982 and 1987, over 400 churches offered sanctuary to illegal immigrants from Central America. It did not take long for this to overflow into the public sector, and cities, states, and other organizations began offering sanctuary until it was the largest grassroots civil disobedience movement in the United States since the 1960s. So in 1996, the government responded, and their response came in the form of the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act, also known as IIR-IRA. And its purpose was to increase border security and punishment for anyone who was attempting to assist illegal immigrants. So some of the most important aspects of this act were that it introduced U.S. Code 1373, which regulated communication between local and federal officials. It also amended U.S. Code 1374, which criminalized the transportation and harboring of illegal immigrants. In 2001, an event occurred in the United States that would also have a major impact on immigration. The terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001, heightened concern for national security in the United States like never before. So, in response, the Department of Homeland Security created what is now known as the Immigrations and Customs Enforcement Agency, or ICE, in 2003. ICE was created by combining two formerly existing departments, the U.S. Customs Service and the Immigration and Naturalization Service. The role of ICE is to enforce federal laws regarding border control, customs, trade, and immigration to promote homeland security and public safety. In 2008, ICE implemented a program known as Secure Communities, which allowed ICE to access the fingerprints of individuals in American prisons, check their immigration status, and take action to deport them. Under Secure Communities, local law enforcement agents were expected to share the fingerprint information of criminal aliens with the FBI and with ICE. ICE also requested that persons subject to removal be detained in local facilities for up to 48 hours while ICE could review their cases. Disapproval of the deportation of those who had committed minor crimes, the process of detaining candidates for deportation, and other aspects of the program led many local jurisdictions to decline cooperation with ICE. The relationship between ICE and local law enforcement deteriorated so badly that close to 300 jurisdictions enacted or imposed limitations on their cooperation with federal immigration authorities, thus producing what we know today as sanctuary cities. In 2014, The Secure Communities Program was replaced with the Priority Enforcement Program, which was supposed to be seen as less harsh. PEP focused on apprehending only the most dangerous criminals and concentrated resources in the areas of public safety, border security, and national security. Though sanctuary policies in many jurisdictions were well established at this point, what has brought the issue back into the center of attention are President Trump's policies regarding immigration. On January 25th, 2017, shortly after his inauguration, the president passed an executive order threatening to withhold federal funding from jurisdictions who continue to enact sanctuary policies. The order also included the re-implementation of the Secure Communities Program, which was the catalyst for the sanctuary cities to develop in the first place. So before going any further, I just want to make sure we're clear on what a sanctuary city actually is. Part of what makes the ongoing debate difficult is that sanctuary city is not an official term and it has no legal definition. Not all jurisdictions with sanctuary policies are even cities at all. Many counties and entire states self-identify them as sanctuaries. But in one instance, the Department of Justice defines sanctuaries as jurisdictions that may have state laws, local ordinances, or departmental policies limiting the role of local law enforcement agencies and officers in the enforcement of immigration laws. These policies and the way they play out, however, differ between each individual jurisdiction. But in general, a sanctuary city can be described as one that does not cooperate fully with efforts made by the federal government to enforce immigration policies. So what are commonly known as sanctuary policies are also sometimes referred to as limited cooperation policies. It's also important to note what sanctuary cities are not. Sanctuary policies do not necessarily guarantee exemption from deportation to any illegal immigrant. Even if local law enforcement does not comply with enforcing federal policies, the federal government is still entitled to bring about actions toward the end of immigration enforcement. So, though no two sanctuary cities function identically, there are three main categories of sanctuary policies. So, don't ask policies discourage local law enforcement from asking residents questions regarding their immigration status. Don't enforce policies place limits on arrests and detentions based on immigration. And don't tell policies prevent local officials from sharing immigration-related information with federal officials. So, in the ongoing debate, there are three main topics that are used to argue both for and against sanctuary cities. The first is crime. So those in opposition say that with a decreased risk of deportation, undocumented persons residing in these jurisdictions are more inclined to participate in criminal activity. They also say that the existence of limited cooperation policies could attract non-citizens that are more likely to engage in crime on a day-to-day basis, which would lead to a greater concentration of potential criminals in sanctuary cities. On the other hand, supporters of sanctuary cities assert that sanctuary policies serve to alleviate criminal activity and promote public safety because illegal immigrants can develop more positive relationships with local law enforcement. Other arguments for and against sanctuary policies are related to economic concerns. So those in favor claim that compliance with ICE detainers costs local jurisdictions money and resources that should not be allocated toward enforcing federal policies. While those against claim that illegal immigrants impose costs on American citizens by receiving benefits funded by taxpayers and filling job positions that would otherwise be available to American citizens. One of the more complex points in the sanctuary city debate has to do with the legality of sanctuary policies. Are they breaking the law? So, Article 1, Section 8 of the United States Constitution specifically assigns the role of immigration to the federal government. The Congress shall have the power to establish a uniform rule of naturalization. The 10th Amendment states that the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. So this brings up important questions regarding federalism. What is the relationship between the states and Congress in regard to immigration? Are local jurisdictions legally obligated to participate in immigration enforcement? And how far can those localities legally go in standing in the way of the federal government from fulfilling its role? Are sanctuary jurisdictions in violation of U.S. Code 1373, which states that local governments cannot prohibit information sharing with ICE, or U.S. Code 1324 that outlaws the transportation or harboring of illegal immigrants? There are a few court cases that offer precedents for arguments on either side of the legitimacy of sanctuary policies, which I explored in great detail in my paper, but I will not drag you through a legal analysis right now. But if you're interested in that, please read it. But there has been no official decision made as to whether sanctuary cities are strictly in violation of the law. And as for the arguments of crime and economics, there is not enough empirical research to determine the validity of the claims, a concern I also further discussed in my paper. The reality is that the sanctuary city debate is clouded with weak arguments on both sides, and it is a discussion that cannot be separated from the larger and more important issue, which is illegal immigration in the United States. With roughly 11 million illegal immigrants currently in the United States and up to 400,000 more coming every year, there are inevitable consequences that cannot be ignored. If the state of immigration in the United States is not addressed, there are negative implications not only for the United States and its citizens, but also for undocumented individuals that are already within the United States and all future immigrants. Based on my research, it seems more accurate to view the sanctuary movement not as a problem in itself, but as an attempted solution to a greater problem. A recognition of the fact that the United States has failed to uphold its end in maintaining the rule of law, which has led to certain unjust consequences, has given birth to the sanctuary movement. Viewing sanctuary cities as an attempted solution to a problem, we must ask, what is their ultimate goal? The ultimate goal of sanctuary cities is essentially to grant amnesty to undocumented immigrants who are currently in our nation. And the key argument for this has ultimately not to do with legal concerns, economic consequences, or crime, but on a moral conviction. There is an idea that can be traced back to the spiritual origins of the concept of sanctuary and the first sanctuary movement in the United States, that the U.S. government has failed to uphold justice in its immigration policies, and therefore we have a moral obligation towards those affected that transcends the law. In order to evaluate the validity of this idea, there are some much deeper questions that need to be answered. First we must ask, what is the proper role of government in a free society? The answer can be found with English political philosopher John Locke and our own founding fathers. The simplest answer is given to us in the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. The idea here is that people enter into what is known as a social contract with government, in which they agree to obey it as long as it continues to protect their natural rights. Because these rights are negative or fulfilled by the absence of action, government only need act when people under its social contract have their natural rights threatened. Viewing government in this light delegitimizes any argument that government has a responsibility to enforce either positive rights or the special moral convictions of certain individuals. A key aspect of the Lockean and American social contract theory is that it is conditional. If government fails to protect the rights of its people, it need not be obeyed. It seems that many persons involved in the sanctuary movement believe that the government is acting unjustly and have justified their defiance of the law on that basis. Moreover, the American people have long accepted the doctrine of civil disobedience, implicit in the Judeo-Christian conception of a higher law. As St. Augustine said, an unjust law is no law at all. What then constitutes just action by government? In the words of F.A. Hayek, justice is the principle of treating all under the same rules that aim to provide for an equality of means. Proponents of what is often known as social justice seek to provide an equality of result, whether that be that all end up with equal monetary wealth, or as relates to this discussion, equal status as legal residents of the United States. However, equality of means and the enforcement of general standing rules, which is equal treatment under the law, do not and cannot create an equality of outcome or result, which is not and never has been an attribute of the traditional sense of justice in American society. In the case of illegal immigration, there is an unequal application of law, and therefore justice has not been upheld. Many illegal aliens reside in the United States with little to no fear of law enforcement, while some are deported to their home countries. Some individuals who attempt to immigrate to the United States through legal processes are denied entry, while many who enter illegally are allowed to stay by lack of enforcement. The United States government must take responsibility for its failure to uphold the rule of law. The rule of law in a free society is what prevents government by ruling by arbitrary power. The government's failure to subject itself to the rule of law and rule by equal enforcement of the law is unfair to those who attempt to immigrate to the United States through the legal processes, and unfair to those who enter the country illegally because without legal status they are not protected under the rule of law. It does seem that the United States has contributed to unjust circumstances as it relates to immigration, and therefore must address resulting problems. But what is the solution? Is the solution proposed by sanctuary cities the right one? So many believe that Americans should welcome a policy of open borders because we have historically been a nation of immigrants. In reality, though, aren't all nations nations of immigrants? This may be overlooked because the process is usually slow and historic, and because the United States is still a comparatively young country and has experienced larger waves of immigration in shorter periods of time, it may be known as a nation of immigrants. And even if the United States were an anomaly in the world as a nation of immigrants, the fact that something has historically occurred does not necessarily mean that it should be maintained in the future. Take slavery, for example. The main problem with proposing a policy of unregulated immigration is that immigration now is so vastly different than from in the past. The most obvious difference is simply that today the United States has a much larger population than earlier in its history, and it would be illogical to assume that a country could maintain an unlimited number of immigrants while its physical space and resources remain mostly constant. Also, in the past, there has been somewhat of a balance between those who immigrate permanently and those who eventually return to their country of origin, with the rate of return decreasing from 37% to 15% from the year 1900 to the 1990s. One reason for this is that the United States has grown into a huge welfare state, which cannot sustain an endless number of people receiving its benefits. A policy of open borders with no immigration regulation at all does not seem to be the best answer. So I do not think that the solution proposed by sanctuary cities to the problem of immigration, which is essentially a policy of free and open immigration, is sustainable. Neither do I think that their main argument, which is a moral concern for social justice, has a place in a discussion of public policy. I do think that the United States immigration policies should be evaluated on the basis of justice, and where it has failed, it should seek to make amends. Going forward, a uniform policy of immigration, which is equally applied to all, should be implemented and equally enforced so that all future immigrants to the United States do so through the legal processes. When the government is acting according to its proper role and it successfully is administering justice, we as members of the social contract must obey it. And where we feel so compelled in the realm of spiritual and moral conviction, such as aiding those who seek a better life within our borders, we should actively seek to bring about positive good under the rule of law. I cannot pretend to be able to propose a comprehensive policy that will solve the problem of illegal immigration, but I want to leave you with a quote by Henry David Thoreau. But to speak practically and as a citizen, unlike those who call themselves no government men, I ask for not at once no government, but at once a better government. Let every man make known what kind of government would command his respect, and that will be one step towards attaining it.
Well, Sarah and Ariana, thank you for those fantastic presentations. I think two of the best that we've ever had. We're going to now start the question portion of the evening. I'm going to start with the first question, and other folks here at the dais will ask questions. And then we'll allow you, if you have some questions of our presenters. Let me apologize in advance that I can only stay briefly because I'm actually doing a presentation this evening on Florida Made, the book that President Fleming mentioned, so I'll be off to that. But thank you so much, and it was a joy to work with both of you. Let me ask a question of Sarah first, and I wanted to focus, come up to the microphone if you would. I wanted to focus on this question of federalism because I think this is really important. Certainly, as you mentioned under Article 1, Section 8, the federal government has the exclusive power to determine immigration policy, but at the same time, states are not deputized by the federal government to have to undertake their role. And there's been this conflict between the federal government and states and local authorities about the federal government trying to make them de facto immigration officers. So can you speak about that tension and the issue of federalism that you brought up?
Yes, so one of the big issues is, exactly as he's saying, technically, federal or immigration enforcement is reserved to the federal government. But there is an expectation that local law enforcement agencies assist with this because the federal government doesn't have the resources to be in every location at every time, all the time. It's the local law enforcement agencies that are interacting specifically with criminals who may be subject to deportation. And so they're the ones that are getting contact with these people first. And so it makes sense that they would be the ones that had access to the information that would then be used by the federal government to do whatever they wish, to deport the people or give them amnesty. But I think it's difficult because sanctuary cities, they want to say, you know, we're going to say, stay out of it. The federal government can do its job. But it seems, at least so far, that's been ineffective. The federal government hasn't been able to do its job, which is clear by the fact that we have such high numbers of illegal immigration. So it's difficult. It's difficult to say. Would it be more effective if local law enforcement participated? Yes, 100% yes, it would be more effective. But do they have to? No.
Thank you.
Sarah, I might as well stay. I have a question, another question, Sarah. You know, you pointed out that the argument of the advocates of sanctuary city policy and open borders and so forth generally casts the discussion in terms of morality, right? They're making into a moral argument, social justice, and all the rest of it. Do you think that's done in good faith, that it's actually moral concerns that are impelling this discussion, or could there possibly be more crass and even vulgar political motives being cast as moral motives? I mean, that's...
Of course. Obviously, I have not spoken to every advocate of the sanctuary movement, and I can't say for sure their motives. I think definitely there are people who genuinely are concerned for the state of people in other nations or even in our own nation who are seeking a better life here and maybe have had bad experiences with our immigration policies and genuinely think that sanctuary policies are a way to help them. I think people do feel that way and are acting out of a moral conviction. But as with any political issue, there are definitely other factors at play. Just for example, if you look at the number of voters who come from minority groups, it's a huge number. And the people that are supporting the sanctuary movement are coming alongside these people and are also adding to the number of this voter pool that, let's say, a mayor of a sanctuary city, if he agrees to let sanctuary policies proceed, he's gaining a huge voter base to keep him in office. Whereas if he comes out and says, no, we're going to enforce federal immigration, chances are he's losing, he will not be revoted in. So I think that's a huge factor.
Have there been any studies done, identifying the political affiliation or tendencies of these sanctuary cities? Are they Democrat, Republican? Is there any kind of pattern there? Or?
Yes. So if you just look at the locations, number one, of where sanctuary cities are, they all fall in blue states. Not all, but a lot. And the demographic of proponents of sanctuary cities and immigrants tend to fall more with the democratic ideals because they tend to promote social justice ideals, and because they're the ones that are promoting more government spending and programs, which the immigrants are directly benefiting from.
Thank you. Thanks.
Sarah, while you're there, and we have some questions, I know, for Ariana. First, easy question is, during your research, was there a position that you switched on? Did you start with one understanding and you, at the end of your research, had a different conclusion? That's question one. Go ahead and answer that.
Okay. Yes. So I came in not knowing a lot, but just because of, my, past political affiliations and just people I'd spoken with, it was easy for me to, come in and say, sanctuary cities are bad, we need to argue against them, they're breaking the law, that's it. Which I'm still not an advocate for sanctuary policy. But I came to the understanding that if you look, again, at the motives behind the movement, it started to look more to me as more as a social movement than a political one. And it was something that I could understand, I could empathize with. Especially I was inspired to research this topic because I spent a summer living in an immigrant community.
Where?
In Chicago. And so I think there are definitely situations that we can empathize with and understand why people would want to advocate, on the behalf of undocumented immigrants in our country. And so I kind of had to not necessarily switch my position, but switch my approach to the argument. Instead of, you can't look at a moral argument and come in with legal statistics or issues of crime or economics, because that's not what they're concerned about. And especially on the legal front, if they're able to say, the government is in violation of our human rights, then who cares if it's legal or not, right? That's part of our tradition, and we respect that. So I had to change my approach and to say, okay, well, let's, validate this position. Where do they have some strong points that we can understand, and how do we go about addressing it on the same front? So coming with issues of, what is justice? What does it look like for the government to operate rightly? And I think that's the only way to offer a counter-argument to a movement like what it has become.
Sarah, my second question is on the economic topic that you mentioned. Florida is concentrated with agriculture and also hospitality. My guess is that a high percentage of illegal immigrants are working in both of those areas of employment. Do you have comments further about the economic justification for sanctuary cities?
Yes. So I went a little more in depth on this in my paper, but so one of the main arguments against sanctuary cities is, taxpayers shouldn't have to pay for benefits that are received by non-citizens, and that illegal immigrants are taking jobs that Americans would otherwise have, and so it's, a negative impact on us as American citizens and our economy. And there are, again, like I said, there's not a lot of firm empirical research to say one way or the other with, hard crunch numbers. But there have been some studies done and some research done on either side. But a lot of the conclusions have been that typically illegal immigrants are filling job positions that Americans wouldn't necessarily have in the first place. They're willing to work for less pay, longer hours, that U.S. citizens, conditions that U.S. citizens might not want to work in. And on the economic front, because oftentimes illegal immigrants are willing to take less pay. I'm not an economist, but it has an effect on prices. So if they're paying less for the labor, then the product prices are going to go down. So some studies have actually said that it might have a positive impact, which is why, to me, it wasn't a strong enough argument to use in the case. But
Thank you. Ariana?
can I sit?
Dr. Elmore, do you have a question?
Yes, I do. I feel like this is, I haven't talked to you about this particular topic since the beginning of the process, and I want to see maybe how your thoughts have evolved on this. In my experience, as I've told you before, some of the most vocal critics of charter schools, particularly charter schools, not every form of school choice, but charter schools, in my experience, have been public school teachers and administrators. And I'm wondering, what you would have to say specifically, in your future career. For example, if you were confronted with a challenge to charter schools from a fellow teacher, an administrator, what would your answer be based on what you've learned?
Yeah, so based on the people that I spoke with and the teachers that I spoke with and the administration in both public and private schools, I actually didn't have anybody tell me that they were not in favor of charter charter schools. But I did have someone explain to me, John Kirtley actually explained to me a little bit about the unions and the teachers, and he was saying that he doesn't believe that any teacher is opposed to school choice, which, I mean, you can't really generalize, but all teachers want their students to succeed, to be provided with an adequate education. And so the idea of charter schools, if they have a problem with it, tends to be, from the research that I've done and the people that I have talked to, tends to be on the side of we think that charter schools are somehow disadvantaging the public schools. So when I spoke to Lori Rich Levinson, who's a District 6 board member in Florida, she was telling me that her main problem with charter schools was, she said something along the lines of, they are causing a disadvantage. They are opening where they're not supposed to, where they don't need to be opened, and they are disadvantaging our public schools. And from the research that I did, I didn't find that disadvantage. I found charter schools that were filled with a diverse student population, that were filled with high-achieving students, that were filled with capable teachers, that were producing great results. And obviously there are charter schools that don't do that well, and in my paper I go a little bit more into what happens when a charter school doesn't perform well, and how easy it is to close a charter school, and if that does happen and what happens. But I think I would just say, ask them about if they have examined the facts and what their experience has been, because I feel like a lot of that has to do specifically with certain experiences that they may have had or things that they've heard, but not really had the facts.
Ariana, do you have a count on the number of charter schools that have closed in the state of Florida?
I don't know the exact number. I know that it is, different sources say different things. Some say, oh, this is a really high number. It's actually a smaller number than in other states, but I don't have the exact figures on that. I do mention that in my paper, but what I have found is that when they have about a 3 to 5 year period, depending on their district, to show that they are being effective in their instructional methods. And the majority of charter schools that are not performing to those standards when they put in their reports are closed within the first 3 years. So,
did you you referenced in your presentation, thank you very much, that there perhaps are some pay differentials between public and charter. Were you able to research that and come to any conclusions regarding teacher salaries?
I did focus more on the overall funding of the school than individual teacher salaries, but the figures that I showed in the presentation today were focused on the federal and state funding for the schools and does not include other private funding that schools receive.
Okay. Does our audience have any questions for either of our LeMieux Fellows this evening? Ms. Hardman, if you would stand, thank you.
Thank you both, Sarah and Ariana, for your fantastic presentation. I went to a public school that just recently became a magnet school. So my question is for Ariana. And on the subject of school choice, where do magnet schools fit into that?
Yes. So where do magnet schools fit into school choice? When you categorize different choice options, you have public schools and you have private schools, and then charter schools are kind of a hybrid of those things. They're privately run but publicly funded. They're considered a public school. Magnet schools are the public school's version of the charter school. They're still run by the public school, but they have a certain curricular emphasis, but all of their testing and everything is the same as the regular public school. Thank you.
Other audience questions? You, excuse me, sir, you'll have to stand. You'll also have to stand and identify yourself. Do you have a,
Sarah's phone.
Dear old dad.
I'm just curious, when you're looking into the charter schools, the people that are creating these, or what kind of, the people, what's behind the charter schools? People, organizations?
great
Yes.
question.
What's behind the charter schools? That varies by charter school. A lot of them are nonprofit organizations that have a certain focus. So for example, the KIPP schools in New York are focused on underachieving students and preparing them for academic success in the university. So they have a specific curricular emphasis and were formed in order to accomplish that. But then there are also charter schools that have been started by former teachers or by businesses as a part of their company, their corporation. They'll start a school for the children of their employees. So there are a lot of different models, but generally the most successful ones are nonprofit entities with a specific curricular focus.
Other audience questions? Yes, sir.
My name is Donald Singh. My wife and I retired from the New York City school system. Sarah, excellent. Mary, Adrian?
Sarah.
Excellent
Sarah.
presentation.
Sarah and Ariana.
The question is, in charter schools versus public schools, what are the differences in admission policy and discipline policy and expulsion policy?
That's a good question.
Yes, thank you. So the differences between public schools and charter schools in admission, discipline, and expulsion. Those, again, vary very widely by the district that you're in, the state that you're in. Generally, charter schools are required to accept students through some form of a lottery system. So they may target a certain population that is near them, but through that population, they have to employ a lottery system, and then after that, they may have a secondary lottery for other students. Generally, they have a certain percentage of their student population that can take that focused curricular emphasis population, and then they have another portion that takes pretty much anybody else who wants to enroll in their school. But again, that varies widely by district. As far as discipline goes, they are still subject to laws and regulations about that, but they can have their own philosophies of discipline. So for example, one school that I read about has a form of discipline that involves positive statements, and they have a very specific way that they go about addressing student behavior issues. Charter schools with zero tolerance policies are also common, but especially in rougher areas. But it really depends on the school. There's not, at this point, there's not a standard all the way across beyond what the state requires legally.
Earlier this evening, one last question. Yes, sir.
Hey, my name's Dale. I'm in Dr. Law's ethics course.
You're fortunate then. You're fortunate to be in Dr. Lob's.
The criteria for grading metrics in the public school system versus the charter school system, is it exactly the same? Because I know you mentioned charter schools they're not subject to certain state education functions.
Yeah, so are the measures of grading charter schools the same as public schools? The short answer is yes. They follow the same pattern once they take the student scores in order to grade the schools. The long answer is the charter schools are not required to administer state-mandated tests, but they must administer some form of nationally recognized standardized test. So the tests that they get those scores from might be a little bit different, and they have their different formulas for equating those. But the process of calculating the performance of those schools is the same.
So a charter school graded as A might not necessarily be the same as a public school rated as A.
No, the idea is that it's the same rating. The only thing different would be what test the students took.
Earlier in the evening, Senator LeMieux recognized that we had former LeMieux Fellows here, both of whom have married since leaving Palm Beach Atlantic. So I'm going to use their LeMieux Fellow name. So if Cassie Stanton and Jen Wolfren would stand, we wanted to recognize you. Also, with Sarah and Ariana are some very special guests, and would you both recognize those who have traveled to support you this evening?
Yes, thank you. So today, up here in the front row, to your left, my right, are my parents, Andy and Jennifer Fernandez, and my grandparents, Carol and Gary Forrester.
Sarah?
My parents, right here, Stacy and Billy Murray. Thank you. And then my sister, Hattie, who is a high schooler and future sailfish. Thank you.
Would you join me in once again thanking Dr. Rader and Dr. Elmore for their contribution to this program? And finally, one more recognition for our two LeMieux Fellows. Congratulations to both of you. There are refreshments. We encourage you to stay and visit with our two fellows. Thank you for joining us this evening. Good evening.